things are really escalating in Iran. The crowds are getting much, much larger over the course of the last couple of days. We'll talk about that in a moment. But also the regime has been killing protesters. And reports are that hundreds, if not thousands, there's differing reports, have been killed by the regime in the protests. And this, of course, puts a lot of pressure on President Trump, who said at the beginning of this that if they started killing protesters, the United States would step in and protect the protesters and do something about it. So all eyes are on President Trump. We'll get to that towards the end of the video. But first, let's take a look at what's actually happening on the ground there. Look at the crowds in Tehran. It's really quite something. Here, take a look at this. This is the The reason that the crowds have gotten so much bigger has to do with the crown prince, Reza Pahlavi. He is the son of the Shah of Iran. The Shah was the previous ruler of Iran, the previous sort of like the king of Iran before the 1979 revolution. Of course, Iran was basically a democratic country, but they had this Shah, this ruler, and he was beloved by many, but there were some problems. Otherwise, the revolution wouldn't have happened. But his son, Reza Pahlavi, who lives in exile, has been encouraging much larger numbers of protesters to come out. Specifically, he asked them to come out on Friday and Saturday, and that's where the numbers really ramped up. So this really speaks to the fact that he might have more popular support than a lot of people think. Now, I want to point to something interesting about in this statement he put out. He put out a statement encouraging the protesters, calling on them to come out again next weekend. But listen to this sentence. I invite workers in key economic sectors, especially transportation, oil, gas, and energy, to begin nationwide strikes. Now, that's a very specific request, and it also makes a lot of sense. You see, the main income, the main cash flow for the Iranian regime is their oil and gas industry, right? Selling their fuel, but also the transportation industry. If you shut down transportation, no economy can function. So by calling on the transportation, oil, gas, and energy sectors to go on strike, he's really looking to cripple the regime completely. He also specifically calls on young people to come out, and he makes this very interesting statement. Look what he says here. Our goal is no longer simply taking to the streets. The goal is preparing to capture and hold city centers. They're really trying to cripple the regime in so many different ways. And we've also heard reports around the country that there are cities that are being taken over by the protesters. That doesn't mean the regime is about to fall. There's a lot of different ways that this could go. And at the end of this, he calls on the young people to come out there. And he ends with this beautiful, encouraging statement. I'm preparing to return to my homeland to be with you, the great Iranian nation, with when our national revolution succeeds. I believe that day is very close. Long live Iran. And there's been a lot of speculation about how much popular support he actually has. But the fact that large crowds have come out in response to his calls really speaks to the fact that maybe he actually does have big support. Now, a major development that I wanted to focus on here is this. Take a look at this fascinating news story. This is from Azerbaijani News today. 34 mosques set ablaze during Tehran protests. The people of Iran are actually turning against Islam, and they're burning mosques. Here's footage of a major mosque in Tehran. Iran! 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 So they're actually turning against Islam. Look at this video posted by Tommy Robinson, the great British activist, of this Iranian girl talking about
beheading, raping, and Islam isn't the religion of Iran, or isn't the religion of ancient Persia. Islam was forced on us after torturing, killing, beheading, raping, and slaving Iranians into becoming Muslim. Iranians, Persians, we're actually Zoroastrian. And even though we might not label ourselves Zoroastrian anymore, it all traces back to it. Zoroastrianism is, you can't even call it a religion when you look at the scripture itself. But it's the first monotheistic religion, believing in one true God and one God that rules it all. The most famous example of Zoroastrian priest being mentioned is in the Bible when the three Magi go find Mary and offer her frankincense, myrrh, and gold. They used to calculate the stars, and the star led to Messiah at the time. Zoroastrians have one mantra. It's good words, good thoughts, good deeds. That's why Cyrus the Great always believed in humanity. He freed the slaves, freed the Jews. He gave everyone the same rights. He gave women rights. That's just the Zoroastrian culture. And the culture itself, you could probably, if you were to look at the Gathas and read the Avesta and Horde Avesta, you would see it's more of a philosophy of life. God inherently wanted the world to be good. God never wanted the world to be bad. I will share more about this, but good words, good thoughts, good deeds. And that's what reflects in the Iranian people compared to its terrorist regime, torturing, killing, raping, murdering innocent children, innocent humans, innocent adults, someone's father, someone's mother, someone's sister, someone's daughter. So I urge you to start educating yourself before you take on sides or embrace propagandas that are funded by actual terrorist groups.
Look, this has massive, massive implications. I cannot say this enough. Massive implications. If the Iranian people are actually turning against Islam, then that changes everything globally. Iran is a massive country. And until 1979, until the revolution that brought the Islamic regime to power, it was a Muslim country. But because the regime was so brutal and so oppressive, it's actually made the Iranian people turn against Islam. So now in their rejection of the regime, they're burning mosques. And here you see this girl, and maybe she's reflective of a lot of young people who are turning to their original Persian faith. Or you have a growing Christian underground church that we've known about for a long time in Iran. If the Iranian people reject Islam in the course of bringing down the regime, the reverberations worldwide will be immense. Iran is a massive country. If you add up the populations and the geography of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel all together, they still don't equal the size of Iran, both in terms of population and landmass. That's how big Iran is in the Middle East. And if this massive Muslim country turns against Islam, think what that means globally. All over the world, Islam is ascendant, and this desire of Muslims to take over the world and bring everyone to Sharia law, and this sense of victory they're having as they take over Europe and other parts of the world. Imagine what it'll mean if a major Muslim country ceases to be a Muslim country and moves away from Islam. That delivers a defeat to the forces of Islam worldwide, and it could have massive political implications far beyond this region. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that President Trump issued this warning, this ultimatum, that if they start killing protesters, America is going to step in. Well, now they've started killing protesters. And so on Friday, which was the first big day that they were killing a lot of protesters, and there were massive demonstrations, and the demonstrations got really big in the streets after Reza Pahlavi's call to the people to come out, President Trump was asked what his plans are in Iran. So let's take a look at this clip here, and then we'll talk about it.
How long do you think the Ayatollah will be in power after what we've seen play out on the ground there? When is the U.S. going to get involved now that reports of protesters being killed on the ground?
So Iran's in big trouble. It looks to me that the people are taking over certain cities that nobody thought were really possible just a few weeks ago. We're watching the situation very carefully. I've made the statement very strongly that if they start killing people like they have in the past, we will get involved. We'll be hitting them very hard where it hurts. And that doesn't mean boots on the ground, but it means hitting them very, very hard where it hurts. So we don't want that to happen. There have been cases like this where President Obama totally backed down. But this is something pretty incredible that's happening in Iran. It's an amazing thing to watch. They've done a bad job. They've treated their people very badly, and now they're being paid back. So let's see what happens. We're watching it. We're watching.
Okay. Big statement by President Trump. I have a lot to say on this. So let's start with the fact that he invoked Obama. Now, he wasn't just taking a dig at Obama by saying that Obama backed down. This was actually a very important part of this statement. You see, during President Obama's term, there were protests in Iran. There have been mass protests on and off in Iran for the last 15 years or so. And when these protests happened during Obama's term, he originally said that he was going to protect the protesters, and he warned the regime against killing protesters, and then he didn't do anything. Now, the fact that President Trump mentioned that means that the likelihood that America will step in and do something is very, very high. Because now that he's mentioned the fact that Obama made a threat and didn't make good on it, if he goes ahead and makes a threat and doesn't make good on it, he'll look even worse, especially because he just compared his situation to Obama, which means that the likelihood America is going to do something is very, very high. At the same time, today there was a report that came out from Washington that the White House is considering its options and not sure what they're going to do or when they're going to do it. It might take a little while. It might not be so imminent that they'll take action. Now, how do we take this? It could be that that's what they're doing, that they're actually delaying and they're stalling about taking action and trying to maybe deciding to let things take their course. Or it could be a misdirection play. Let me explain what I mean. Back in June, during the 12-day war, everyone, of course, remembers when the Americans went in with the B-2 bombers and took out the Iranian nuclear facilities. Well, that happened on a Saturday, right? The second Saturday of that 12-day war. And on the Thursday, 2 days before the B-2 bomber attacks on the nuclear facilities, Caroline Leavitt, President Trump's press secretary, issued a statement. She made a statement saying that President Trump has decided to think about it for a couple of weeks before deciding whether or not the Americans are going to attack the nuclear facilities, because there was all this speculation for the first week of the war at what point or if the Americans were going to step in and attack certain nuclear facilities that the Israelis didn't have the type of bombs that could easily destroy them. And if the Israelis did it on their own, it would take much longer and be much more costly. And there was all this speculation about whether America would get involved. You might remember that. So on the Thursday, 2 days before the B-2 bomber attack, she said that President Trump is going to take a couple of weeks to think about it. And then 2 days later is the B-2 bomber attack. Now, that B-2 bomber attack, Operation Midnight Hammer, was such a complex and large-scale operation that obviously 2 days before, it was already decided that they were doing that. You can't just turn an operation like that on and off like a light switch, which means that the statement that he was going to think about it for a couple of weeks was a misdirection play so that the Iranians would be caught off guard. Is this also a misdirection play right now, or is the Trump administration really deliberating over what to do? But again, the fact that he invoked Obama, who made a threat and didn't make good on it, and criticized him for that, greatly increases the likelihood of a U.S. action. At the same time, we have to think about Israel, because today, the Speaker of the House of the Iranian parliament made a statement that if America attacks Iran, Iran will retaliate by attacking Israel. Now, Israel, its defense doctrine, especially since October 7th, is to take preemptive action if there is a threat building. And if the Iranians are making such a threat like this, the Israelis can't just sit back and wait for an Iranian ballistic missile attack. Those can be extremely damaging, especially if the regime feels like it's falling and it's got nothing to lose. They might really, let it all fly, and that could be extremely damaging. Israel's a small country, doesn't have a lot of strategic depth, and therefore can't afford to absorb attacks. And that's why Israel's doctrine, its defense doctrine, is always preemptive. So this creates a bit of a game of chicken about what is Israel going to do, what's America going to do, and how are things going to play out at the same time as we have protesters being killed, the protests getting larger and larger. And like I said, long term, let's keep an eye on this fascinating rejection of Islam by the Iranian people during the course of this. So this is a rapidly developing situation. We will continue to bring you updates in the coming days.